karanasan mo po, di na ba nakasalanan ng dito?
Media educators and journalists called to defend press freedom.
Karanasan mo po, di na ba nakasalanan ng dito?
Media educators and journalists called to defend press freedom.
Good evening. You're watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. Joining me tonight is a multi-awarded filmmaker, author, director, and film historian. Throughout his career spanning over 3 decades, he has authored and edited several books on cinema and its history. He has made films about the transformation of Filipino society from militarism to democracy, such as Oliver, The Sex Warriors and the Samurai, and Memories of Old Manila. He is also the director of the recently established Center for New Cinema. Please welcome Nick Deocampo. Good evening, Nick.
Good evening. It's
Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Well, quite a multifaceted personality. You are from filmmaking. Of course, you're an author, film historian. How did you get here? What got you interested in films?
Well, it's the movies. It's the moving pictures. So I was growing up in Iloilo, and at a very young age, I was already seduced by the movies. So, the usual story that you skip your classes and then you get to watch movies, and then suddenly you discover a different world. And so even at a very early age, I really thought, I was very much intrigued by the movies. And, you get to work on it.
Yes.
I came here to UP Diliman, but, I didn't really get to enroll in the College of Mass Comm where I'm teaching right now. But I had to leave for Paris.
Yes.
And really study there because there was really no film school in the country. So I was pursuing my dreams, and well, here I am.
Who were some of your inspirations or idols at that time? Growing up, who did you watch? What captured you?
You won't believe this, but I was watching Fellini. In
Really?
some. No, maybe they didn't really know that. Fellini is such a great Italian master,
Yes.
but his films were very, sexy and all that. So maybe they were showing this in second-run movie houses, and don't ask me how I got inside those movie houses, but I did get to enter some of those movie houses, and there I was, just transfixed by the whole idea that there is this film that is so different from the Filipino melodrama. They were just spectacular, films like Satiricon, Roma. How they got to Iloilo, I mean, it used to be that in the 70s, they used to screen some European films.
Yeah.
We still had some of those, right? Wala pang Betamax noon,
Right,
70s, and maybe very early stage of the video, but otherwise you really got to see movies as movies. So when I saw it on a big screen, there it was, I mean, Fellini. So
transported you.
Just transported me,
In terms of our local directors, you talked about once how you were a student of Lino Brocka. Also.
Not really a student.
Or you
He
attended his
never really
lectures?
taught, but I went to his lectures.
Lectures, sorry.
Oh, definitely lectures. I would usually sit in front so that all his saliva and lawa, I would get, if one can get influenced by this, I was just there waiting, for every bit of wisdom that he has. And, I'm even teaching, really a course on Lino Brocka, really studying the film language that he has. So Brocka, Ismael Bernal, these were two really very influential directors.
Yeah. When you talk about their film language, how would you distinguish them then from... What is their film language? What is their style?
Primarily, Lino Brocka, if you're going to really study him very seriously, he has highly codified even his own politics. So I really describe, or rather what I really try to teach, in terms of Lino Brocka is, his use of space, cinematic space, and how he politicizes that space. His notion of marginalization, and Lino Brocka is known for that, it is really translated cinematically in terms of his use of filmic space. So that many of his characters are very much near the margins, and literally you're really seeing the marginalization in the way he makes cinematic representation.
Right.
Now, is this, arbitrary? Did he really think about it? Well, one doesn't discuss that anymore. I mean, sadly, Lino Brocka is dead, but his works live on. And so the very fact that this kind of cinematic strategy appears in several of his films, then that is speaking a language. because language is really a convention, and if it's being if this pattern is being used over and over again, then he begins to communicate with you.
Well, very interesting. We'll talk more about symbolism in film, especially in your line as educator later. But right now, we're very much a product of our environment, as with Direct Lino Broca. Now, you started your career in 1983. This was a very different time. What was it like, the situation then?
Well, 83, Ninoy was just shot, right, at the tarmac. And that's when I really grabbed my camera and then said, it takes the lead off, in terms of your own safety. It's a do or die thing.
Yeah.
That was the environment that I was in. So I made my first major film, and that's Oliver. And many critics still think that that is still my best, all right? Because it really unmasked the militarization that happened, but done on a very personal level. So I was working on a transgender, maybe that's how we call the transvestites, which we used to call before, who performed in Manila's gay bars.
Yes.
And the whole notion of sexual repression as a product of military repression, I think that is just written large in that film.
So did you intend to really have social-political messages in
Yes.
your films? That
Immediately
was really
I say yes.
Especially,
I mean, no more holding back. It's letting go. It's really letting go. I grew up as a homosexual, and I went through my own personal drama, and I just thought, I needed to liberate myself from out of that. And I studied filmmaking, and I thought that my medium at that particular time was the movies, moving pictures. And so I used it to arm myself, and everybody was talking about, emancipation and liberation. So I really used cinema as a platform for my own personal emancipation. But you see, Oliver led to 2 other films, so it was a trilogy. So it was not as if I finished with one particular film. It was an agenda.
it opens up more questions,
Absolutely.
more areas for research.
Until, I dealt with another topic, children of the regime, because I identified with the politics of the young at that particular time. I mean, what was really happening to us young people, and what kind of a future do we have under, a military regime?
Right.
And finally, because I sort of sensed that, we're leading to a revolution. By around 1985, I started the third in the trilogy, and that would be The Revolutions Happen Like Refrains in a Song, when finally in February, the EDSA revolution happened. So I was just there with my camera, gloriously capturing and documenting with such audacity my own coming out, and the country being emancipated as well. So it was quite an audacious work because the personal became the political.
Right.
And it was such a perfect timing, intersection. The coordinates were just perfect in terms of my personal coming out, and at the same time the political liberation.
Were you ever fearful for, it was quite a risk that you were taking in every sense of the word.
Yes.
What were some of the, challenges that you faced at that time?
Well, because this happened at around, among 6 years of the span of around 6 years, well, you get to be questioned, you're shooting in Ermita. At that time, it was really the country's brothel, and you get picked up.
Yeah.
And then I had my own shares of threats on the phone that, your hours are counted, etc., because, you get to document a brothel that's being run or protected by the military. So these were, before the days of hidden cameras and all that.
Yes.
So, a Super 8 camera was a very small camera. It was the grandpapa of the digital
That's
right now,
yeah.
right? So you can go anywhere and shoot. And people didn't look at it as a professional medium. It was amateurish, but I politicized the use of the amateur medium.
Yeah.
And to a certain point, well, these are now archived memories of that particular time. The value that they have now is really very archival.
Right, and you've covered many controversial issues, even gender, women issues. Your career spans 6 presidencies.
Oh,
How
yes,
is it? I mean, what a change. How has that evolved? How would you say the presidencies involved your affected or influenced your work?
Well, I really look at my films as chronicles. So I look at myself like a chronicler. You know, I mean, I had always been fascinated with early chroniclers like Pigafetta and all of these. And how could they, you know, really paint and capture and record, I think major moments in our history. And this would lead me later on to my, my interest in history.
Right.
I think documentary and history, they really go hand in hand. And this really ground us to the realities of our time.
Right.
And so my being a documentary filmmaker, there you are, you know. I mean, are we just going to watch a parade of all these presidents? And they were colorful personalities.
Yes.
Oh my God, from a dictator to the first woman president to an actor to God, you know.
You couldn't have imagined such a script.
You're
maybe.
giving me an idea right now. Oh my God.
The next project?
We live in very interesting times. I mean, 6 presidents.
Yeah.
Including a president who's my age right now. I mean, Pinoy is my age.
Imagine that.
This is interesting.
Okay,
Suddenly,
we have the next project.
I think we've got a very
So
interesting
definitely
thing.
your work is a reflection of Filipino society and
And
the
consciously
times.
at that.
Yeah.
Because, yes, now that I'm getting old, I feel that, I'm just being true to what I really want. And that is,
Right.
a chronicler. And as I said, it's not just my films, but my books that will be, I hate to use the word, my legacy, you know, but
It's
that's
true.
it. I mean, are we really treating history seriously in this country?
Yeah.
I mean, it amazes me that after 100 years of cinema in the country, the history of cinema, Philippine cinema, has not really been written. And that it's really sad.
And this is so important for us to understand our present also, whether it's our government, you know, our own personal situations.
And that is the reason why we're always caught in this cycle of just repeating and repeating many of the mistakes in the past.
Right. So how do you think that, looking just back, just that film itself, how is that going to help the Philippines kind of elevate its current situation where we are now?
It is the lessons of the past.
Yeah.
So for me now, history should really teach us the lessons. You know, if we want to lift ourselves up from the past or make us move forward, all right? So for example, in the films that I make, you know, in 3D at that, you know, the 10-hour history of cinema in the country, I revisit how cinema really started in the country because it creates such a parallel that 100 years after, in the age of digital technology, we're almost repeating, you know, history once again. But did we really learn from the past? While I come here to your show with an agenda, I'm always full of agenda, all right, of reinventing cinema. I mean, what is prevailing out there, despite the indie cinema that they call, they're really repeating the melodrama of the past. Maybe they're even winning more awards because they're becoming better with that melodrama. But is melodrama the solution, the only solution, the only change that we can see for the future? So we're repeating that again, and nobody's out there to tell them. But I don't even know whether people would like to listen to me. So I'd rather teach in UP, you know, wherein, you know, there may be a small bunch of people. You can turn them into, you know, the new cultural warriors, and maybe, you know, something will
nice
stick
term,
in.
cultural war.
Oh, yeah.
So this is why you started the Center for New Cinema.
Yes.
That
and
inspired. Tell us
how
about
to define the new cinema
Yeah,
is
what
going to
is
be
the new
interesting.
cinema?
Well, new functions for cinema. All right. And I would like to consider that what I would like to do right now is to open up a third front for cinema. What are the 2 earlier fronts? One is the commercial cinema. It's existing. It's been around for 100 years, all right? And then if you will allow me, you know, in the 80s, I had my contribution in formulating the agenda for independent cinema. But it was very much shaped by the politics of the times. The indie cinema right now, let them define themselves because
Very
I'm really
postmodern all over the place.
Postmodern, all right. I don't
Hard
know
to
what
define,
they have.
yeah.
But I really feel in the end, it does not serve a greater purpose. After traveling all over the country for more than 20 years, creating film literacy in many places and with more than 3,000 students through my workshops, I'd like to open right now a third front, and that is more of creating an educational film market. So this is how I position the notion of a new cinema. It's really pedagogical in nature. It does not anymore aspire to win in Cannes or anywhere. We have 20 million students in school. They have a great need, not just through books, but through moving pictures. We are in the digital age. This is the age of audiovisual literacy.
Yes.
People don't want to read books anymore. So that's where I want to create right now, you know, a new front
Right.
But I hope people will listen.
And what you're trying to do is not just do it for adult education, but even through kindergarten, huh?
K to
Start
12 is going to be
Yes.
K to 12 is going to be very challenging.
Interesting.
Because I was one of those in DepEd that they asked to be in a technical group to allow now the introduction of audiovisual materials to supplement the books for the learning, for the learning process.
Yeah. Very exciting times. Now, we'll talk more about that, but we just need to take this short break. When we return, we will discuss how our guest became an accidental archivist. News Cafe will return, so stay tuned.
It's one perfect example of how the invading American culture was not able to vanquish the dominant Spanish culture. As an example, Spanish words seeped into our native words. We are entering a sinihan, a word taken from the word cine, which came from the Spanish word cine, that was a shortened version of cinematografo, from the French original cinematographe. As we enter, we are greeted by the taquilla, where we buy our ticket from the taquillera. We go to the orchestra or decide to go up the balconaje. We see posters of films carrying Spanish titles. Inside the theater, we call many of the things we see in words whose linguistic origin we have taken for granted. In front of us is the big white telon or screen, flanked on both sides by the cortina or curtains. There is an entablado in front where live programs can be held. From where we stand, we can see the sillas at the orchestra. As we look behind us, here in the balconaje, we see the cuarto de proyección or projection booth where the film show is run. Dito sa eskolta ang tahanan ng aking mga alaala, kung saan unang naipanganak ang pelikula. Sa malansang ito aking nagugunita ang nakaraan, panahon ng Kastila kung kailan naipanganak ang aking nakaraan. Unang araw noong taong 1897, unang naipalabas ang pelikula. Dito na itakda ang simula ng buhay pelikula. Isang hamak na aksesorya lamang ang naging tahanan ng kanyang pagsilang. Banyagang angkat ang mga aparato at ang mga pelikulang ipinalabas dito. Kinagiliwan ng mga unang manunood ang mga pelikulang galing pa ng Fransya. Wala pang isang taon, may sumiklab na kaguluhan. Ito ang labanang Kastila at Amerikano. Natawag itong Battle of Manila Bay. Mabilis namang naisapelikula ang insidenteng ito sa unang mga pelikulang gawa nung panahong iyon. Bida na ang Pilipinas sa mga kauna-unahang pelikulang nagawa sa mundo.
Welcome back to News Cafe with our guest, Director Nick Deocampo. All right, Nick, let's talk about you being a film historian, but really, they call you an archivist for some reason, but you did plan to do that. How did that come about? You are a film collector.
Yeah, because I travel to many places, either as a member of the jury or I'm in grants and all that. So I would frequent Washington, D.C., and that's where you have the Library of Congress.
Yes.
And that's where they keep a lot of these documents about the Philippines. They carted away a lot of documents about this country, from this country.
Yeah.
So I would spend my weekends or my vacations in Washington, D.C., when I was studying in New York University. And there I was able to see exactly the earliest films that were made about the Philippines. But they were also the earliest films ever made in the world.
Wow.
No less by the studio of Thomas Alva Edison, the great American inventor.
Wow.
So when you get to see this, then you begin to study exactly that, look, if the Philippines was colonized by America and Hollywood is in America, the film capital of the world. Therefore, there was a lot of interest in the Philippines as its former colony. And you begin to ask the question, so what was the role that cinema played in colonization?
Right.
And voila,
Very
of course,
important.
a book came out. But
5
earlier
volume.
than that, you have to look at the texts.
Yes.
And the texts were the old movies. And you can buy this in the US for $40, $80. So I make such a huge investment with my own personal scholarship money and all that. And so I just started purchasing them or begging them to, that if I can have them, like in the case of Zamboanga.
Yes, right. How did you come up, and why is that film so important also?
So important because Zamboanga is the oldest extant or existing film in the country right now. What do I mean by that? Locally produced. Because the Edison films, they were produced here, yes, but they were brought back to America to be, of course, shown to an American market. So we did not really own them, but the films were about the Philippines. Zamboanga, however, were done by 2 American producers, Harris and Tate, and that was in 1937. So the interesting thing is Harris and Tate revolutionized local filmmaking by setting up the first industrial studios in the country.
Right.
It's called Philippine Films. Now, the interesting thing is they imported 20 tons of equipment in order to just make the film. And what is important there would be the underwater shots, that were shot in Zamboanga and partly in Hulo, Sulu.
Wow, incredible. At the time, there was no digital animation or anything.
And it
like
was
that.
well received in Hollywood.
Wow.
So big names like Frank Capra, for example, were hailing the film as really a magnificent, astounding piece of cinema that came from the Philippines.
And many of us don't even know about this. We haven't seen this.
And of course, the film starred Fernando Poe Sr.
Wow.
So, and with Rosa del Rosario, the big stars of the 30s.
Wow.
These are really, it's quite an important thing. And the interesting thing is how I discovered it.
How did
I
you
was on the
discover it?
last few days of my research at the Library of Congress, and then I was asked by the director, the director of the film center, and then he said, can you kindly take a look at this film, because we're not sure whether this is Polynesian, Indonesian, Thai, what is this film? Where did this come from? And so I went into the room, and then suddenly, just a few minutes into the reel, and then I said, oh my God, I was screaming, and you're not supposed to scream at the Library of Congress. And so they all rushed, and then they said, what's wrong with you? And so I said, you just discovered, a great masterpiece, a long-lost film from the Philippines. And that started the big buzz at the Library of Congress. And so, in as much as I'm leaving in less than 5 days, I really would like to have this film brought to the Philippines. But it took a long time until the director of the Library of Congress came to the Philippines on his own money and personally delivered the film and donated it back to the Philippine government.
Hopefully
so
it was also taken well care of, here.
I do hope.
This is another
it's
issue
a small
over
fund
here.
right now, so
Right.
I do hope.
Wonderful. So how do you choose, or when you look around the world, how do you decide what film, or where do you even look? How do you know where they are?
Archives.
Okay.
Archives or personal collections.
Yeah.
And chismes.
Chismes.
All right. You get to you get to circulate, and talk. Like for example, I went to Malaysia. Little did we know that Filipino directors were imported by Malaysia. Where around 5 film directors made films in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah.
Among them is our national artist, Lamberto Avellana. So I brought home, out of the 11 that I was able to catalog, I brought home 9.
Yeah.
So there it is. I mean,
Imagine
little
that.
did we know that we contributed to the building of the Malaysian film industry.
Very interesting. You were also looking for a 1914 film called Native Life of the Philippines by Dean Worcester. Now, this was a controversial film.
It's
Why?
a very controversial
Why
film.
was it controversial?
First, Dean C. Worcester was the first Secretary of the Interior of the American colonial government. He was a photographer. Many of these photos that you see of bare-breasted Igorots and Kalingas and all that were shot by Worcester. Charles Martin, actually. But Worcester is the one behind the whole project. Then, when he retired, he went back to the northern province and then shot a documentary there. It's called Native Life of the Philippines. And then after that, he, because he's done with his duty in the Philippines, he went to America and traveled to 50 lecture sites showing the films, and the most horrible thing that he did was he used the film to campaign against the granting of Philippine independence.
Horrible.
So last year the film was celebrated its centennial, and this year, we're commemorating, his lecture tour.
Right.
And so I'm trying to get a grant right now from the National Endowment to make a documentary, actually, about this film, because I went as far as Cebu, Iloilo, looking at all the vociferous criticisms that the natives had with the film. They really lambasted him like crazy.
Right, right.
But in America, it was all laudatory.
Yeah.
They were all saying, wow, this is a magnificent documentation of the Philippine
painting
natives.
their own view of the
course.
Philippines.
So
right?
it is highly controversial, and I don't know if they're stirring up a hornet's nest again by reliving the drama of it 100 years after.
Oh, it's good to know it's out there. You were also looking for a Cebuano film, is that right? The Cebuano film. It was a 1969 film. What's it called? Badlis sa Kinabuhi.
Oh, that has been found. What is really of my big concern right now is the Cebuano cinema, meaning the collection of all the Cebuano films, because we need to stop the arrogance of Tagalog cinema as if it was the only national cinema. Little did we know that we had maybe a more popular cinema in Cebu because there were more Cebuano speakers than Tagalog speakers. Tagalog is really, a few provinces here. Maingay lang because it's the capital of the country. But otherwise, we lack research on how really Cebuano cinema spread all over that region, all the way to Mindanao. And they were producing films, not as much as Manila, but as popular as. And based on my researches, they were just delayed by maybe 3 to 5 years in terms of the sound studio, in terms of color, in terms of all of these things. But nobody's really researched on that. But I've written the history of Cebuano cinema, so I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
I just hope it will turn into a book one day.
Right, I'm sure it's coming out in your future collection of
Maybe.
books. Now,
Hopefully.
you've said that every film made is historically significant, even commercial ones like, I don't know, the recent ones that have been coming
Why
out in the
not?
film fest.
Yeah, every.
Why is it you say that they reflect the times, no?
Yeah.
You're saying once in one of your interviews you even said like Pido Dida,
Why
which is during the
not?
time.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
No, because film, there are 4 ways that maybe we can look at film as history. No? Film and history, in other words, film located in a historical continuum, that's one. 2 is that film as history. And any film is a recording of a particular time. The costumes, the makeup, the hairstyle, the everything, the language that we speak. Then history in film. History is also in case in film. For example, the case of Jose Rizal, to celebrate our centennial. Why does it always have to be Jose Rizal? So during that year, I made a film about a woman. And she is a madre, right? Mother Ignacia. Little did we know that a woman, 2 centuries earlier than the founding fathers of this country, already thought of a proto-nation. She wrote the first constitution. Ang mga lalaking ito, sorry to bash the men.
Please do.
All right.
You're
is
welcome
that
to.
what took them 2 centuries to think of a constitution, wherein the citizen of the country is really defined. But Mother Ignacia, by creating the first not the first, but putting up a beaterio, a nunnery, already defined the proto-nation in the constitution that she wrote 2 centuries earlier. We're waiting that, she's going to be turned into a saint.
Right.
So that was my added discourse to the celebration of the centennial. Why does it always have to be men?
It's true.
To be...
And
but we lack really research. If we think about... Now, I may come up with a new bump for you here. Maybe it was a woman who put up the first movie, who really set up the first movie, the Tagalog movie industry by the name of Titay Molina.
So very interesting. Lots of chismis also that comes
It
out.
all starts with chismis, but in the end, if we research enough, the role that women played in this country, they're immensely big, this woman was married to an American who made the first film about Jose Rizal. And because she was the owner of the Zarzuela company that acted for that film, she was also the first directora.
Right.
Do you think this woman, Titay Molina, would just sip her tea while she is watching her American husband direct Tagalog, so doesn't even know the language?
Yeah.
I am quite sure that woman, stood up and directed the the actress herself. And why are we not going to give the credit to her?
Very interesting. This is another topic that many of your films look into, women empowerment, the role of women back in the day. One of your films too looked at the bases and how they led to the formation of the that kind of prostitution.
Yeah.
So maybe now we're going through the RH bill. Do you think that at least from the times when you were working with the sexual enslavement, maybe during the military bases, to today, has it changed much? Or it's just evolved?
They're more empowered right now. I mean, they have a political party, and that is, I think, very exciting that we have gone quite far. If I were to make a documentary on women right now, it will have a totally different texture. All right. I looked at women and gays, lesbians during the time of militarization, and the notion of victimization was very much there. I mean, it was the language of the times. But you can see in my documentaries the sense of struggle. All right, to get out of that political situation. But now, I mean, look, we already have 2 women presidents.
Right.
Okay.
Women justices,
we don't have to,
yeah.
But the thing right now is we also have a political party, the Gabriela, they're all in Congress. So, no, we've gone quite far.
And I think films are very important too in taking these issues to the forefront.
Sure.
So what do you think our government needs to do to sort of support the film industry more, especially in terms of preservation of historical archives such as film? We lack that, don't we?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of talk that, a 250 million film archive will be set up in Tagaytay. So we're all crossing our fingers, let it happen. All right.
Because last year only we have the National Film Archive, no? What is the one set up in Cubao?
Sort of, that's right. You're right. So that one, well, the government right now, would you believe it, is the biggest producer of indie films.
Really?
Isn't it? I mean, it is, kaya nga, that's the contradiction of the indie films right now. How can it be state supported?
Yes.
When I would like to think that the state support should really go more into education, go more into creating a market, really reaching out to the audience.
Yes.
But it wants to produce films that, maybe would go to festivals, and maybe that's their notion of how the country will be known. But, I mean, that's highly problematic also, I mean, my feeling is maybe we should leave the private sector to really develop and create more of a better ecology, creative ecology for the filmmakers rather than, but it's highly debatable.
Right. Well, since you brought up film festivals, during your API fellowship, you traveled a lot around Asia and all over the world for film festivals too. Yeah. So this is also ecology for filmmakers that you're nurturing.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? I mean,
well, primarily for API, it was really to do the documentary on water. All right. Okay. So that one was very intense because I really dealt with indigenous knowledge about nature, and I think that gives a kind of a unique Asian voice to the issue of environment. And how can you not be locally specific when it comes to environment?
Yes.
One thing which I detest really would be experts descending on local specific sites and then prescribe certain environmental rules. But what I did for my documentary is, I met shamans and I met healers and I met really local people, fisher folks. And this is where you begin to see that they have this knowledge of the environment, minus the PhDs that we have. So it was more of a humbling experience, when I met this very noble people who've got, great ideas about the environment.
Yeah, well, I'll ask you more about that. We just have to take another short break right now. When we return, we'll talk to Nick Deocampo about film literacy and the importance of film education and cultural preservation. Keep it here on the Solar News Channel.
Nang matumba ang rehimeng Kastila, sinakop naman tayo ng mga Kano. May pagbabago sa pamumuhay. Kaunlaran ang dulot ng Amerika na nagtulak sa kalakaran na humayo mula sa makitid na eskolta tungo sa modernong avenida. Naglipa na ang makabagong aliwan. Dito namuo ang bagong tahanan ng pelikula. Mga artistang Hollywood ang kinagiliwang pantasya ng bayan. Dito rin nakitaan ng pagbabago ang mukha ng Kamaynilaan. Bagong kalakaran sa negosyo, bagong sasakyan, bagong pamumuhay.
Ito ang Cine Majestic, unang modernong sinihan na gawa sa konkreto. Dito ating kinagiliwan ang mga sining gawa Hollywood. Di natin gaanong pinansin ang pananakop ng kano sa aliw na dulot ng mga palabas. Di kalaunan, ang pelikula ay unti-unting nagsalarawan ng mga Pilipino, kahit banyagang angkat ang gamit na aparato. Sa loob ng Grand Opera House na ipalabas ang pelikulang Naukol kay Jose Rizal, dito na isalamin ang buhay ng bansa sa pinilakang tabing. Di nagtagal, na isakamay naman ng mga Pilipino ang pelikula. Nataguriang ama ng pelikulang Pilipino si Don Jose Nepomuceno. Ang kanyang dalagang bukid ang unang sining gawa ng Pilipino. Ang pag-unlad ng pelikula ay di na mapigilan. Ang makabagong paggawa ng sine ay nagdulot ng mga pelikulang tulad ng Zamboanga. Sa pagtayo ng estudyo, naiangat ang pelikulang Tagalog. Ang kanyang pambansang sakop ang nagbigay dito ng kanyang pambansang kakilanlan. Di nagtagal, tinagurian itong pelikulang Pilipino.
You're still watching News Cafe with my guest, Director Nick Deocampo. Okay, Nick, so you were just talking about this environmental series you were working on. This is one of the new projects completed by the Center for New Cinema.
Right. So it was a product of a research fellowship, and I was able to travel for 3 years, in and out to places in Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Japan, and the Philippines. And for the Philippines, it was Batanes, where I met, I encountered a very strange experience in terms of shamanism, because animism is still being practiced there.
Yes.
And it is very much related to their catching of the seasonal fish called dorado. And so they offer animal sacrifice, they talk to the spirits, they count the waves, they can divine the clouds. And is it something that you learn in a university? Is it worth a PhD to do that? No. So we entered that spirit world, almost unarmed and totally, at a loss as to...
Yeah, as academics, it's
as
unsettling,
academics, suddenly we were just out of words. How do you read, how do you count the waves, for example? But they can.
Yes.
And then they talk to the spirits, but where is the spirit? So you get to learn, you get to be humbled by an experience like that, because these people, common fisher folks, they're very much attuned with nature. And so it is us who need to learn from them, because on the other side of the island, a ship, a multi-million ship with all the radars and everything just got sunk by a typhoon, but for maybe decades, these people have not lost a life, because they know exactly that, those cloud formations, they can bring harm. So they can read already nature.
There's
and
meaning.
they are already forewarned. The other one, with all the radars and everything, it gets sunk. So you begin to compare all of these things, and then I'm not saying that let's get back, that's too romantic.
Yeah.
But maybe there are a few things that we can learn from them.
It's changing your perception on certain
Absolutely.
things. So what you're trying to do with this documentary is to change policymakers' minds. Right?
We hope that they can include in their policies, not a top-down way of telling people on how to survive disasters, but rather it's going to be from the bottom up. That, environmental policies really need to be locally specific.
Right.
Because, local people, they have survived for years. But the sad thing about it is, these people who get drowned during the floods in Bali, these are not the either they're dayo or they're just new to the place, and they're not really very much attuned to nature. What I'm talking about are people who really live in that place, have a common heritage, they believe in their traditions, and so they have developed a belief system that helps protect them, when there are disasters.
So it's basically empowering the community and getting them involved, no? Giving them a sense of ownership too for any project.
And it's us who we learn from
That's
them.
true. That's true. Now let's go back to your education. Now you as an educator, you have studied around the world and you've received also many awards and numerous acclaims for from different institutions and universities. What would you say are some of the best, I don't know, maybe practices or lessons that you've brought back with you here?
The lesson of history, all right? No, it's really, it's this production of knowledge, all right? And history can produce that knowledge. It's the way we need to codify that knowledge. And that's why I have to write books, because, as a matter of giving back, I just came from humble beginnings, I was born in Manila, but grew up in Iloilo in so much poverty. Kung wala pa yan sa mga scholarships ng UP, ng Fulbright, all the education that I had, they were all from scholarships. I banged doors, I kicked doors, let me in because I just want to be educated. So, and I think, I'd been privileged to study in some of the best universities, studied with the best professors. And so what do I do with that knowledge?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hire me in this country. Nobody wants to. I mean, it's the irony of my life that I think I've got so much to give. So back to teaching, which I love. I mean, Christ was a teacher.
Yes.
He was the greatest teacher. So
Very
I think I'm in the
important.
most noble profession of teaching. But we can make an industry out of this. What I'm trying to say here is, my Center for New Cinema right now, how do I define new cinema? It's really, as I said, creating a new front. And I'm very much now into pedagogical literacy or pedagogical cinema. What I'm trying to say here is that why must cinema always just be entertainment? Why does it always have to be melodrama? In other words, I think that's the reason why we are the most emotional people in the world, because you get to watch a film about Leyte, and what we have there is always crying, there's a sense of loss, it's always an emotional register. But what I'm trying to say here is, can we be more literate? Can we rise above after all the, I'm not denying ourselves of the emotions. I'm a very emotional person too.
Right.
But how can we progress from here?
Yes.
For example, instead of talking about, okay, we are so aggrieved and let's tear down the government for this and that reason, all right? The thing is, why don't we think about the mangroves?
Yes, find
And how
solutions.
find solutions. I mean, what new industries can possibly come out, or how can we distance ourselves from the danger area? Why can't we make films about nature, environment, science, gender, spirituality? Let's codify the knowledge.
Right.
We owe it to the 20 to 25 million students who are in school as we speak right now. They deserve a cinema. So for me right now, a cinema of their own. So my new formulation of cinema is cinema equals knowledge.
Right.
What's wrong with that? I mean, I'm not denying ourselves that cinema equals drama and emotion. Fine, we have made an industry out of that. But you want us to talk about new advancements in cinema? That's how I define my new company. And that's what I'm trying to do right now. Can we make films about history? Can we make films about the environment?
Yes.
Can we make films about political systems in this country? Health and sanitation. I mean, they are the least dramatic. They're not going to win in Cannes. But hell, I mean, we operate on need.
Yes.
What is the greatest need in this country? Outside of feeding people, it's education. It is and cinema cannot really fill up your stomach, but cinema can fill up your mind.
Yeah.
And so this is where I want cinema to go. It's the third front. But hey, it's a big industry too. If you just charge 50 pesos out of 20 million students and you give them education through films, that's a billion peso industry. Something to think about.
Yeah.
So calling all the capitalists out there, let's talk about it. What I'm trying to say here is that these students spend 200 pesos for video games.
Yeah.
And that's just within a week. I'm talking about 50 pesos in a year.
And look what you gain through it.
Look
no?
what you gain,
Yeah.
but also the new capital for us to make new documentaries, new films, new short films.
Well, this situation you described, this is maybe a result of our culture also. This is the corruption we
It
see here,
is
isn't
colonization.
it? Exactly.
Until now, that's what I'm trying to protest against. 100 years of cinema under Hollywood, we only believe in melodrama. It's about time we break that down.
Yes.
It has become so monolithic. We need to find other ways. I'm not even talking of anything new here. In America, why I am so nourished this way is because there are film libraries. They buy all of my films. Yale just bought the entire documentary series that I have.
Imagine that.
Because it's being taught in environmental courses, in documentary filmmaking, in communication courses, and all that. So suddenly, this educational films feed into the educational industry.
Yeah.
And so lips and bounds, their minds just grow and grow and grow. In this country, we become so emotional, we are only either angry or sad. And that's it. Our films create that ecology.
How would you compare other countries? You're always around in film festivals, the different countries and their culture that supports this kind of knowledge sharing.
Well, in Asia, this is what I'm trying to say, and I'm really looking at 2015 when there is an ASEAN integration within the region.
Yeah.
I think we need to talk about it. Here I am again, just like the indie cinema in the 80s. I was there like a lone voice in the desert talking about we need to find new alternatives to the commercial movie industry because the ship is sinking. And true enough, the ship sank, and then suddenly, yeah, pinick up nilang indie cinema, but I'm already in another planet. I'm now into educational films. And here I am, I want this program to be a record of what I'm saying. Believe me, 10 years from now, everybody will be into educational films.
You always seem to be ahead of the times. Huh?
Well, but nobody seems to listen until, you know, they pick up the soundness of it. I mean, who is going to argue against film as education?
Right, yeah.
We have 20 to 25 million students in need of this. So I call this the cinema of need. This is the cinema that we need right now.
Right.
I mean, we have enough Captain Americas out there. You know, I mean, people who can afford them. And mind you, I watched the film twice. So is this a contradiction? No. I go and watch it voluntarily. But, you know, in terms of education, we need, this is where we need to step in because there's so much responsibility in producing knowledge.
Exactly. Also very important because media shapes culture and society. And film.
Amen, Mitzi. I love you for saying that. And I do hope that, you know, you continue doing this because I strongly feel that this country, you know, can
There's
go
much to be
far.
done.
There's so much history here, but so unprocessed. And we just start with that. Environment. Oh, God. We just went through the worst storm, typhoon ever in history. Were there lessons learned there? Let's talk about mangroves. I'm passionate about mangroves right now.
So where do you think the hope lies? You're talking about education, right? So the youth, many filmmakers out there, everybody seems to have their 15 minutes of fame being with the internet. What should they be doing then? What would your advice be to these aspiring filmmakers, producers?
I'm back to my own personal realities. I'm a teacher. I don't want to prescribe anything for the world. I'm not in government. Nobody wants me to be there. I'm not in the industry, so maybe that's good also, so I can keep my distance. So, let me use the word. You know, I'm a scholar. You know, I just have to reconcile myself with that. I produce knowledge. One thing which I love so much, more than being a filmmaker, I'm a teacher. And I think my students will appreciate that. I love all my students. You know, it's the production of knowledge that I think can really emancipate us. There is nothing like, Rizal said this a long time ago. Why can't we listen to him? Knowledge, kaalaman, you know. I mean, and Filipinos are so, I'm not saying that others are not, but, you know, we're very receptive to knowledge. Kung minsan nagdudunong-dungunong at sobra pang pagkadunong-dunungan eh. But if you just give them the right knowledge. So, tama ito, the investment is in knowledge, but even the investment that we have, Bali, is not enough. It's really redirecting some of the tools that we have. I look at film not anymore as a sense of art. Enough of it already. I mean, I'm not saying stop it, but rather let us move on to other things. As a tool for education. That's how I look at cinema right now. It can be a tool for the education, not just of people who can afford to go to schools, but rather for community education. So that's why I travel from island to island, school to school, and do my literacy programs, create film museums, you know, so that people can really have a center where they can learn things.
Well, you just celebrated 30 years of your career. You're now going over 30 years. You've done so much.
Counting years.
And it's wonderful what you've done really for the country and that you're still doing now. What next? What are we going to be seeing from Nick Deocampo in the next
No, I really would like to see that cinema is mainstreamed in our educational system with the K-12. This is the right time because we were reinventing the educational system. In UP, we just changed our calendar, right? So this is time for change. And we are on the early age of the 21st century. This is the time for invention and creating new systems. 2014, look at 1914 and all that. Cinema was barely, 15 years old.
Yeah.
Digital cinema is barely 15 years old. So this is the time for change. In other words, I am, together with the technological and material infrastructure out there, I really advocate intellectual infrastructure. In other words, it's important that we have hospitals and roads, but do we have, high-rise buildings inside our minds?
Yes.
Do our spirits soar into the sky or, spread across the oceans? We need to have the intellectual infrastructure. So that's my buzzword right now.
Nurture the life of the mind, huh?
I love it.
I've heard that from a writer, yes.
I just heard music here. That's right.
And that's what you've done. Thank you very much, Nick, for all you have done. And all the best for your work.
Thank
and
you
hope
for
to
the
have you back here again.
Well,
that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to my guest, Director Nick Deocampo, for being with us tonight. Now, if you have any comments on our episode for tonight, you may share them on our Twitter and Facebook pages. You may also download the Solar News mobile app on your Android and iOS devices to watch News Cafe via live streaming and catch up on our previous episodes. Join us again next Thursday for another round of interesting discussions here on News Cafe. I'm Mitzi Borromeo. Good night.
Sa bukod, yun ang panakasalanan ng video.
Media educators and journalists called to defend press freedom.
master, but his films were very, sexy and all that. So maybe they were showing this in second-run movie houses, and don't ask me how I got inside those movie houses, but I did get to enter some of those movie houses, and there I was, just transfixed by the whole idea that there is this film that is so different from the Filipino melodrama. They were just spectacular, films like Satiricon, Roma. How they got to Iloilo, I mean, it used to be that in the 70s, they used to screen some European films.
Yeah.
We still had some of those. Wala pang Betamax noon, 70s, and maybe very early stage of the video, but otherwise you really got to see movies as movies. So when I saw it on a big screen, there it was, I mean, Fellini. So
transported you.
Just transported me,
In terms of our local directors, you talked about once how you were a student of Lino Brocka. Also.
Not really a student.
You
He
attended
never
his
really
lectures.
taught, but I went to his lectures.
Lectures,
Definitely lectures. I would usually sit in front so that all his saliva and lawa, I would get, if one can get influenced by this, I was just there waiting, for every bit of wisdom that he has. And, I'm even teaching, really a course on Lino Brocka, really studying the film language that he has. So Brocka, Ismael Bernal, these were two really very influential directors.
Yeah. When you talk about their film language, how would you distinguish them then from... What is their film language? What is their style?
Primarily, Lino Brocka, if you're going to really study him very seriously, he has highly codified even his own politics. So I really describe, or rather what I really try to teach, in terms of Lino Brocka is, his use of space, cinematic space, and how he politicizes that space. His notion of marginalization, and Lino Brocka is known for that, it is really translated cinematically in terms of his use of filmic space. So that many of his characters are very much near the margins, and literally you're really seeing the marginalization in the way he makes cinematic representation.
Right.
Now, is this, arbitrary? Did he really think about it? Well, one doesn't discuss that anymore. I mean, sadly, Lino Brocka is dead, but his works live on. And so the very fact that this kind of cinematic strategy appears in several of his films, then that is speaking a language. Because language is really a convention. And if it's being, if this pattern is being used over and over again, then he begins to communicate with you.
Well, very interesting. We'll talk more about symbolism in film, especially in your line as educator later. But right now, we're very much a product of our environment, as with Direct Lino Brocka. Now, you started your career in 1983. This was a very different time. What was it like, the situation then?
Well, 83, Ninoy was just shot, right, at the tarmac. And that's when I really grabbed my camera and then said, it takes the lead off, in terms of your own safety. It's a do or die thing.
Yeah.
That was the environment that
An author, film historian. How did you get here? What got you interested in films?
Well, it's the movies. It's the moving pictures. So I was growing up in Iloilo, and at a very young age, I was already seduced by the movies. So, the usual story that you skip your classes and then you get to watch movies, and then suddenly you discover a different world. And so even at a very early age, I really thought, I was very much intrigued by the movies. And, you get to work on it.
Yes.
I came here to UP Diliman, but, I didn't really get to enroll in the College of Mass Comm where I'm teaching right now. But I had to leave for Paris.
Yes.
And really study there because there was really no film school in the country. So I was pursuing my dreams, and well, here I am.
Who were some of your inspirations or idols at that time, growing up? Who did you watch? What captured you?
You won't believe this, but I was watching Fellini. In
Really?
some. No, maybe they didn't really know that Fellini is such a great Italian.
Karamihan sa bukod, hindi na ba nakasalanan ng dito?
Media educators and journalists called to defend press freedom.
Good evening. You're watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. Joining me tonight is a multi-awarded filmmaker, author, director, and film historian. Throughout his career spanning over 3 decades, he has authored and edited several books on cinema and its history. He has made films about the transformation of Filipino society from militarism to democracy, such as Oliver, The Sex Warriors and the Samurai, and Memories of Old Manila. He is also the director of the recently established Center for New Cinema. Please welcome Nick Deocampo. Good evening, Nick.
Good evening. It's
Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Well, quite a multifaceted personality you are, from filmmaking, of course, you're